Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question to the Minister of ACC. Does he accept ACC's new clinical pathway for victims of sexual abuse, introduced in October 2009, has drastically reduced the number of people who have been sexually abused who are approved for ACC counselling?
The Honourable Dr Nixon.
Mr Speaker, the decline rate for ACC-sensitive claims has increased from 5% in 2000 to 41% in 2008, when the new guidelines were launched by the Honourable Steve Mahari. The decline rates have continued to increase since they were introduced, although the major change in the reported data is the large number awaiting further information. These delays are a concern. That is why last week I announced an independent clinical review.
The Honourable Annette King.
Question, Mr Speaker. Is he aware of Ashburn Hall, a psychiatric centre in Dunedin, which has worked successfully with ACC to provide treatment to victims of sexual abuse since 2000, but since his announced changes to ACC guidelines, no patients have been referred, and even more alarming, patients in treatment have had their cases reviewed and funding stopped, often rendering planning for a safe discharge extremely difficult? And where does he expect these people to get their treatment from?
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Mr Speaker, I'm not aware of any communication I've had with Ashburn. I would recommend, if there are concerns that that private hospital facility has about ACC's management of sensitive claims, that they refer them to the independent clinical review panel that was set up and is being led by Dr Barbara Disley, a former mental health commissioner, because I will be taking a very strong lead from that review team as to whether ACC is properly meeting its legal responsibilities for those victims of sexual abuse or assault.
The point of order, the Honourable Annette King.
Leave to table a letter written to me from the Director of Ashburn Hall pointing out all the issues I raised in my question today.
Leave is sought to table that document. Is there any objection? Order. There is no objection. Lynn Pillay, supplementary question.
My question supplementary to the Minister. Have you seen the report from National Rape Crisis, which states that the new clinical pathway imposed in October 2009 has almost destroyed the sector, and the review, which will not be completed until late July, is too late for some, and many survivors are suicidal, and there was no alternative put in place?
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
The first point I would make in response to the member is that the clinical guidelines for dealing with sensitive claims was undertaken on research work done by Massey University and launched by the Honourable Steve Mahari in March of 2008. I would invite the member and any counsellors, psychotherapists or others that have concerns about those guidelines or ACC's processes to make direct submissions to that clinical review team.
Supplementary, Lynn Pillay.
In light of the avalanche of evidence showing the changes made to the ACC clinical guidelines last October are having a disastrous impact on the lives of vulnerable people, will he listen and reinstate the previous clinical guidelines while the review is underway?
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
The first point I would make is that under the previous government in 2008, 2,400...
Point of order.
2,000...
Point of order. 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 A point of order has been called.
Speaker, my colleague is trying very carefully to put a very sensitive topic area to the Minister. She's had no political content in her question. She's simply asked about two dates and what guidelines would operate while a review's underway. A Minister can't stand up and talk and say as an answer, to begin an answer, the first point I'd like to make is that the previous government XYZ. That this is clearly all within his portfolio responsibilities for the warrant he holds at present.
Speaking to the point of order, the Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Mr Speaker, in the member's question, she'd made reference to the change in the number of sensitive claims. And what I wanted to point out to the House was that to advance the argument for change, you actually have to show that cases were not being declined previously.
Order. I invite Lynn Pillay to repeat her question, because her supplementary question, in my view, was not that. Her supplementary question specifically asked whether the Minister would contemplate going back to old guidelines while the review is being conducted. Now I invite Lynn Pillay to repeat her question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In light of the evidence showing the changes to the ACC clinical guidelines last October are having a disastrous impact on the lives of vulnerable people, will he listen and reinstate the previous clinical guidelines while the review is underway?
The Honourable Dr Nixon.
I would note that under the previous clinical guidelines that the member wants to return to, there were 2,400 sensitive claims declined per year. I'd also point out that the member is incorrect in her assertion in that both the College of Psychiatrists and the College of GPs has issued statements strongly supportive of the changes that ACC has made. I do not wish to engage in a clinical argument. That is not my area of expertise. That is why I have sought an independent review team of skilled clinicians to look at the differing views and to provide recommendations on a constructive way forward.
The Honourable Annette King.
Speaker, has he heard of a group of survivors of sexual assault called Courageous Women who are challenging the changes to ACC guidelines, and is he prepared to meet them and hear their stories and the impact the changes are having on their lives?
The Honourable Dr Nixon.
Speaker, I've only heard of the group through the newspaper. I think it would be more constructive, given that I've actually made no decisions as Minister with respect to the issue of sensitive claims, because it's such a clinical area in which I'm not wanting to interfere in decisions. The only decision I have made is that there is sufficient concern to justify a clinical review, and I would invite Courageous Women or members of the opposition or any other group that's got concerns about ACC's work in this area to make their submissions to that clinical review team.
The Honourable Annette King.
Speaker, in light of that answer then, why did he phone one of the Courageous Women, an advocate of sexual assault, against sexual assault, berating and bullying her, saying the Courageous Women who signed T-shirts to highlight their concerns at his policy were part of a fiasco and a media circus, and if she wanted to speak out, the only appropriate forum was his review?
The Honourable Dr Nixon.
Mr Speaker, firstly, I totally reject the assertions that the member has made. On Monday, I read in the newspaper claims that this group were to meet with me. That was the first my office had heard of any request, was when I read in the newspaper. The person concerned phoned my office 3 times on Monday. That's right, and said that if she didn't get an answer by 4 o'clock, she would be going on the radio. I phoned her and said to her the proper place for her her concerns was the clinical review, and I think that is entirely appropriate.
Question number 3. Order. 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 I say to the Labor members, remove that immediately. If members do not want to leave this House, they'll remove that immediately. There's order. I'm on my feet. Members know the rules, that the member who is speaking may use visual aids when they're speaking. Other members may not. A member was not speaking then, and that is totally outside standing orders. Question number 3, Gareth Hughes.
Thank you, Mr.
Point of order.